The auction was supposed to start at 9. By 8:45, every seat in the Winnipeg Regional Equipment Yard was taken. They came in work trucks mostly, guys with contractor plates and city fleet IDs, a few in plain clothes, but with the kind of posture that told you they'd spent years in uniform. The yard itself smelled like diesel and cold concrete. The kind of smell that never really leaves a building regardless of what you put in it. Fluorescent lights hung in 2 long rows overhead, one of them flickering at the far end where the cages were lined up against the back wall. Nobody sat near the flickering light, not because it was broken, but because of what was behind it. Sergeant Wade Tully, the auctioneer on contract with the RCMP's Asset Disposition Unit, had been running these events for 11 years. Vehicles mostly. Sometimes seized property. Twice he had run K9 unit retirements, and both times he had gone home and poured himself something stronger than he usually drank. Today would make 3. He shuffled his papers and did not look at the cages. Most of the people there didn't know what the last lot was. The program listed it at the bottom, almost as an afterthought. Lot 14, military working dog, Belgian Malinois, male, 7 years, retired from service, reserve price, $800. No name, no citation, no mention of where he had served or what he had done there, just a weight, a breed, and a number. That was the first thing Sergeant Tully had changed from the standard template when he sat down to write this one. He had not written the dog's name. He had not been able to. Nobody noticed the girl come in. That was the thing people would talk about afterward. Not what happened, but how quietly it started. She came through the side door near the washrooms, the one that was propped open with a rubber wedge, because the latch had been broken since November. She was wearing a canvas jacket the color of dry moss, dark jeans, boots that had seen better winters. Her hair was pulled back in a way that looked like she had done it in a car mirror. She carried a plain white envelope in one hand and nothing else. She looked 22, maybe 24, the kind of age where you still look young but your eyes have already given up the pretense. She took a seat in the second-to-last row and set the envelope on her knee and did not touch it again. Her name was Sable Girard. She had driven 4 hours from Brandon to be here. She had called ahead twice, been transferred 3 times, and on the last call had been told by someone who sounded genuinely sorry that there was nothing they could do. The process was the process, and the dog had been formally decommissioned and entered into the civilian asset rotation. If she wanted to bid, she was welcome to bid. The reserve was $800. She had exactly $1,200. It was what was left of her father's last pay deposit, the one that had cleared 2 weeks after the notification came. She had not spent $1 of it in 7 months. Tully opened with the vehicles. A 2017 Ford F-150 in fleet white, a pair of Dodge Chargers with the decals buffed out, a cargo van that had been used for evidence transport and still had the partition bolted in. The bidding moved briskly. People here knew what they were looking for and what things were worth. Hands went up, numbers climbed, hammers came down. The woman beside Sable Girard bid on the second Charger and won it, and seemed very pleased with herself. Sable did not move. She watched the room the way someone watches a waiting room, present but somewhere else entirely. Tully's assistant, a young man named Perriot, who had a visible habit of chewing the end of his pen, leaned over during the break between lots and whispered something. Tully nodded. He picked up the microphone. "We'll take a 5-minute recess before the final lot," he said. "Anyone who needs to step out, now's the time." Several people left. A few more came in from the parking lot, stamping snow off their boots. Word had apparently gotten around. A couple of the new arrivals had their phones out, which was not technically allowed, but which Tully had long since stopped fighting. When the cages opened, the room changed. It did not get louder, it got quieter, that particular kind of quiet that moves through a space like weather. 2 handlers came through the far door first. They were not Winnipeg officers. They had been brought in specifically for this. Men who worked with difficult dogs who had the right equipment and the right training, and the right kind of patience that has nothing romantic in it. They wore thick, bite-resistant sleeves on both arms. They carried catch poles, the long aluminum kind with the cable loop at the end. Between them, at the end of those poles, was Ghost. His real designation was MWD Ghost, 7 years in service with the Canadian Armed Forces, 2 deployments, 1 commendation, that would never appear in any public record. He was a Belgian Malinois, 84 pounds, with a coat the color of a winter field, fawn and black and grey all at once. His ears were fully erect. His eyes were amber, the kind of amber that looks almost orange when the light catches it. There was a scar along his left shoulder that ran 6 inches and had healed into a pale ridge under the fur. His tail was not raised. His tail was perfectly level. That was, for anyone who knew Malinois, more alarming than raised. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He moved with the handlers the way water moves around an obstacle, not yielding exactly, but choosing his path. His head turned slowly across the room, cataloguing. His gaze passed over the bidders in the front rows and moved on. It passed over Tully at his podium and moved on. It passed over the back rows and stopped. Not at Sable, not yet, but close, lot 14, Tully said, and his voice came out a register lower than usual. Belgian Malinois, male, 7 years, retired from active military service. The animal is in good physical health. He is assessed as high drive and should be considered suitable for experienced handlers only. Reserve is $800. Do I have $800 to open? Silence. Then, from the third row, a man in a canvas vest with a company logo on the chest raised his hand. $800. His name was Vern Colquhoun, and he ran a private security firm out of Steinbach that provided contract guards for industrial sites. He had bought 2 dogs at these events before, both German Shepherds, both now working perimeter patrol at a grain storage facility east of the city. He was not a cruel man, he was a practical one, which is sometimes harder to argue against.
800, thank you.
Do I have 9? Another hand, near the aisle. A man Tully didn't recognize, older, wearing a Ducks Unlimited hat. 900. Do I have 1,000? Colquhoun, 1,000. The Ducks Unlimited hat dropped out. Someone near the window came in at 1,100. Colquhoun went to 12. The window man went to 13. Colquhoun paused, looked at the dog. Ghost had not moved, had not reacted, was still watching the back of the room with that amber stillness, and then Colquhoun went to 14. Sable Girard's 1,200 was already gone. She knew it. She sat with the envelope on her knee, and she knew it, and she did not raise her hand. Her jaw had set in a way that had nothing dramatic in it. It was just a jaw holding itself together. The window man dropped out at 1450. 1450, Tully said. Do I have 1,500? 1450 going once. 1,500. It came from the second to last row. Everyone turned. Sable had her hand up. She was not looking at Tully. She was looking straight ahead, which in the geometry of the room meant she was looking directly at Ghost. Ghost had turned his head. 1,500, Tully confirmed, and something in his voice had shifted. He could not have said what or why. Colquhoun frowned. 17, Sable said, before Tully had even finished repeating the number. That was when the room noticed her. Really noticed. People turned in their seats. Someone near the front muttered something to the person beside them. One of the handlers, the taller one, adjusted his grip on the catch pole without quite knowing why. 1,700, Tully said. Mr. Colquhoun? Colquhoun looked at the girl in the canvas jacket. He looked at the dog. Ghost had not moved his gaze from her. That stillness, that specific, locked stillness, made something shift behind Colquhoun's eyes. He had worked with dogs long enough to know what that look meant. He wasn't sure he wanted to know what it meant here. 18, he said, but less certainly. 19. Sable said it the same way she might give her address. Flat certain. Miss, said Colquhoun, not unkindly, I don't think you. $1,900, she said again, looking at Tully now. That's what I said. I understand, Tully said. 1,900, Mr. Colquhoun. The room waited. Colquhoun looked at Ghost one more time. The dog was still. The dog had been still for 4 minutes, which was not normal for a high-drive Malinois on a catchpole in a loud echoing room. The handlers were still. Everyone was still. "I'm out," Colquhoun said, and sat back. Tully cleared his throat. 1900 going once, 1900 going twice. He let the pause sit. Sold. The sound that went through the room was not applause exactly. It was the sound of a group of people releasing a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Sable stood up. She walked down the aisle toward the front, and the room parted for her, the way rooms sometimes part for people who have decided something. The envelope was in both hands now. She stopped about 10 feet from Ghost and the handlers. The taller handler stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need to advise you that this animal has a bite history and a significant aggression profile. RCMP policy requires—" "I know," she said. "I know what his profile says. He's not safe for most handlers. He's been assessed as non-placeable in civilian. His name is Ghost." Her voice did not rise. It did not crack. His handler was Master Corporal Julien Girard, my father. He died 7 months ago in a non-combat incident in Cold Lake. Ghost was returned to the unit 2 weeks later and assessed for redeployment. He wasn't redeployable, so he ended up here. The handler stopped. The room stopped. "I'm not here to manage him," she said. "I'm here to bring him home." She took 1 step closer, then another. The handlers looked at each other over her head, some private calculation happening between them. The taller one started to say something. Ghost made a sound. It was not a growl. It was not a bark. It was something lower than either of those things. A sound that came from somewhere behind the ribcage, quiet and continuous. The kind of sound a dog makes when it has been waiting a very long time for something and has just understood that the waiting might be over. Sable went still. She did not step back. She did not reach out. She understood, without anyone telling her, because she had grown up watching her father work, had spent her whole life watching him with this dog, that the next move was not hers to make. Ghost sat, not under command, not from a handler's signal. He simply sat on the concrete floor of the Winnipeg Regional Equipment Yard, as though he had decided that standing was no longer necessary. The cable on the catchpole went slack. The taller handler, later, he would not be able to explain exactly why he did it, reached down and unclipped the cable from Ghost's collar. The room was absolutely silent. Ghost stood up. He walked the 10 feet between them without hurry. He did not trot, did not run, did not do any of the things a 7-year-old high-drive Malinois does when something has excited him. He walked, steadily, the way he had been trained to move on patrol, deliberate, controlled, present. He stopped in front of Sable Girard. He pressed his head against her sternum. That was all. He just leaned his head against her chest, and she brought both hands up and held him, and neither of them moved for a very long time. Somewhere in the front row, somebody made a sound that might have been a cough. Tully set his microphone down on the podium and did not pick it up again for several minutes. Later, after the paperwork was done and the envelope had been counted and the forms had been signed in triplicate, Perriot came over with a clipboard and asked Sable if she had a vehicle, because the animal would need to be secured for transport and policy required. She looked at him. He looked at Ghost, who was sitting beside her left leg with the kind of perfect, relaxed alertness that made it clear he had decided where he was and intended to stay there. "Right," Perriot said. "I'll just note that the animal transferred without incident." Outside, the February air hit her like a wall. The parking lot was emptying, trucks pulling out one by one, headlights sweeping the chain-link fencing. Snow was coming down in the light, fine and sideways. She opened the back of the rental, a blue Civic that was slightly too small for the purpose, because $1,200 plus gas money left limited options, and Ghost jumped in without being told. He turned twice and lay down. She stood at the open hatch for a moment and looked at him. He looked back. She closed the hatch. The drive back to Brandon took 4.5 hours because of the highway conditions, and she pulled over twice. Once for gas, once because she needed to stop. Both times she got out and opened the back, and Ghost raised his head, and she put her hand on his neck, and neither of them said anything, because neither of them needed to. The apartment was small, a one-bedroom in a building on Richmond Avenue that allowed pets under £30, which was going to be a problem she would deal with in the morning. There was a kitchen with a window that looked at a parking garage, a couch that had come with the place, and in the corner of the bedroom, folded on the top shelf of the closet, her father's old kit bag with his name stenciled on the side in block letters. Girard, J. She did not take the kit bag down. She put a blanket on the floor at the foot of her bed, the good one from the linen closet, the thick one. Ghost sniffed it. He pawed at one corner. He turned once and lay down. She sat on the edge of the bed for a while in the dark. She had not cried in 3 weeks. She did not cry now, but something in her chest that had been braced against itself for 7 months. That particular tension that grief installs in a person like load-bearing infrastructure. Let go by about 1/4 of a degree. Maybe less. It was enough. In the morning, she called the building manager and explained the situation. The building manager, a woman named no one remembered, everyone called her by her apartment number, said she would have to review the lease. Sable said she understood. She gave the woman her number. She made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched Ghost eat from a bowl she had bought at the 24-hour Walmart on the way into the city, the only one they had in a large enough size. He ate cleanly and thoroughly, the way trained dogs eat, efficiently, without enthusiasm, the way you do when food is fuel and always has been. She thought about her father. She thought about the first time she had ever seen Ghost, at the base in Shiloh, the summer she was 17, when her father had brought her on a family day, and Ghost had been sitting beside him in the shade of the building, with his ears up and his eyes moving across the crowd. He had been 2 years old then, still in his first deployment cycle, and even at 2, he had had that quality, that watchfulness that was neither aggression nor submission, but something in between, something she didn't have a word for at 17 and still didn't now. Her father had said, "He knows exactly where I am at every moment." Not because he's trained to, because he wants to. She had not understood that at 17. She was beginning to now. Ghost finished eating and looked up at her. "Yeah," she said. She rinsed the bowl and set it in the rack to dry. The call from the building manager came 4 days later. The woman had, apparently, done some research. She had found the RCMP press release from the previous spring, and a small item in the Brandon Sun from the month her father died, and a letter her father's commanding officer had written for the record about Master Corporal Julien Girard's service. The building manager called and said she had spoken to the building's owner, and they had agreed that under the circumstances they were prepared to make an accommodation, and that she hoped Sable and the dog were settling in. Sable thanked her. She hung up and stood in the kitchen doorway. Ghost was on the couch, which she had not told him he could do, but which she had also not told him he couldn't. He was lying along the back cushions with his chin on the armrest, watching the window the way he watched everything. Not anxious, not bored. Present. "You know," she said, "he always said you were the better half of the team." Ghost's ear rotated toward her. He said it like it was a complaint. She leaned against the doorframe. It wasn't. She went back to the kitchen. She had work in the morning. She had gone back to her job at the agricultural supply depot the week after the funeral, because standing still had not been an option, and she needed to prep for the early shift. Ghost listened to her move around the apartment with those satellite ears, tracking everything, that amber gaze checking the doorway whenever she passed. She had read afterward about what happens to military working dogs after their handlers are killed. She had read it the way you read things you need to know even though they will hurt you. Carefully, all the way through, without stopping. The dogs were not given to the families, not automatically, not by right. They were assessed and redeployed if possible. If not redeployable, They were offered for adoption through a civilian process that was not quite designed for the reality of what these animals were. The families could apply, but so could anyone. There was no provision for the bond. There was no line on the form that said, "This dog and this person share 7 years of memory and the specific grief of losing the same human being, and that ought to count for something." There was not a line for that. She had filled out the form anyway, back in September, 2 months after her father's death. She had included everything she could think of, had written 2 additional pages of context that she was reasonably sure no one in the process read. She had been told that her application had been received and would be reviewed, and that she would be contacted in due course. Due course had turned out to be a form letter telling her that MWD Ghost had been entered into the civilian asset disposition process, and she was welcome to participate. She had driven 4 hours in February and spent every dollar she had. She did not regret it. She had known, from the moment she read the form letter, that this was how it would go. She had not been surprised. Surprise requires the belief that the system might do the right thing unprompted, and she was 23 years old, and her father had been dead for 7 months, and she had run out of that belief somewhere in October. What she had not expected was the room going quiet. She had not expected the handlers going still. She had not expected Vern Colquhoun, a practical man who had no particular reason to stand down, to look at Ghost and then look at her and make whatever calculation he made and take himself out of the bidding. She had not expected the whole grinding machinery of the process to pause, just for a moment, in that fluorescent-lit yard that smelled like diesel and cold, while a dog pressed his head against her chest. She had expected to fight. She had gotten something else, not justice. She was careful not to call it that, even in her own head. The system had not done right by Ghost, had not done right by her father's memory, and one auction going the way it went did not change any of that. There were other dogs. There were other handlers' families who had filled out forms and been told due course. She knew this. She was going to have to do something with knowing it eventually. But not tonight. Tonight she set her alarm for 5:15 and turned off the kitchen light. Ghost had moved from the couch to his blanket at the foot of the bed. He was already lying down. She sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark. From outside she could hear the sound of the parking garage, a car pulling out, a distant engine, the ordinary noise of a city at the edge of sleep. Ghost raised his head and looked at her. She had her father's eyes. People had told her that her whole life, green-gray, the kind that catch light unexpectedly. Her father had said once that Ghost always knew when she was coming to visit, even before the car turned onto Base Road, that he would get up and go to the door before anyone heard anything. She had thought he was being sentimental. He had not been. She reached down and put her hand on Ghost's head. He did not move, did not shift away, did not do anything except breathe. Slow and even, the way dogs breathe when they are exactly where they need to be. "I know," she said quietly. "Me too." She lay down. Outside, the snow had started again, ticking lightly against the window. Ghost's breathing was steady and slow. The kit bag sat on the closet shelf, with its block-letter name in the dark. She did not sleep right away. But she was not alone in the way she had been for 7 months, and that was different from sleep, and it was enough. The quiet proof that some bonds do not require the living to hold them. That a dog who loved her father had chosen her, not because she was a replacement, but because she was what remained, and he understood, in the way that animals understand the things we cannot say, that remaining was its own kind of faithfulness. The city went quiet around them. Ghost kept watch.